In the headlines tonight, Korea's main rival parties blame each other for failing to break out of a deadlock in negotiations over a special bill that is supposed to determine the details of a probe into April's ferry sinking. Market analysts say Korea's monetary policymakers will cut the nation's key interest rate at tomorrow's meeting. If that happens, it will be the first time since May of last year. And Pope Francis will be in town for 5 days starting tomorrow. The Korean Catholic community is putting the final touches on its preparations. These and much more coming right up at Early Edition at 6. It's August 13th at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Na Hyun-kyung.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us for Early Edition at 6. We begin at the National Assembly, where Korea's two main rival parties are still haggling over a special bill.
That special bill in question is supposed to get to the bottom of what caused and who is to blame for April's deadly ferry sinking.
Our National Assembly correspondent Kim Young-gil says, as of now, the prospects aren't looking bright.
Rival parties are wrangling over whether to give an inquiry panel prosecutorial powers during its investigation into the Seoul ferry disaster. The opposition party and the families of the victims are insisting they be given that authority, arguing that the panel will not be able to root out the causes without it. With the ferry bill in limbo, a number of other bills related to stimulating the economy are pending.
I'm speechless. What are we getting out of this political deadlock? What's the essence of democracy? What are we going to say to our future generations?
Our party has been trying to offer leadership to the parliament. I've tried to break the impasse and have done my best to cooperate.
The government is trying to speed up its drive to boost the economy with a set of stimulus measures, including tax code revisions that are intended to induce money to flow from businesses to households in the form of investment, salary hikes, and dividend payouts. President Park Geun-hye is known to have instructed her aides to cooperate with Parliament to ensure the passage of a set of bills aimed at rooting out corruption and fostering service sector industries to create jobs. But with the rival parties at loggerheads, the new economic team may have no choice but to wait. If the political discord continues, the ruling party may find it much more difficult to pass urgent bills, while the opposition party could be facing yet another leadership crisis. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Now, today, the Presidential Office of Cheongwade released a book about the Park Geun-hye administration's national security policies. This comes on the heels of a surprise proposal from Seoul to Pyongyang for high-level talks. Here's our Hwang Sung-hee with more.
South Korea offered up more carrots to North Korea on Wednesday, saying the two Koreas could discuss the establishment of a so-called peace regime when the time is right. In a book outlining President Park Geun-hye's national security policies, the Presidential National Security Office stressed the need for inter-Korean military dialogue to build trust and reduce the chances of potential clashes. The so-called peace regime is widely being viewed as a potential peace treaty to replace the armistice accord that brought fighting in the Korean War to a halt. That would work in North Korea's favor, which has repeatedly claimed that a peace treaty was necessary for ending what it called U.S. hostilities and for the ultimate denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. South Korea said, however, Pyongyang must take responsible steps for its torpedo attack on the South Korean warship Cheonan in 2010 and the shelling of a South Korean border island in 2011. Also outlined in the book is South Korea's willingness to gradually open up inter-Korean trade and to allow commercial investment for various economic cooperation projects. In other words, Seoul hinted at a readiness to ease economic sanctions on the North, depending on Pyongyang's change in attitude. This comes 2 days after South Korea made a surprise proposal to North Korea to hold high-level talks next week. A response has yet to be given, but for now, the ball remains in North Korea's court over shifting the tone on the Korean peninsula. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
It's becoming crystal clear there is a need for cultural reform within Korea's military. Just this week, 3 soldiers have committed suicide. Our Shin Se-min reports on the tragic trend in Korea's national service and the military's response.
An Army private first class, previously identified as a soldier who required extra attention, committed suicide by shooting himself in the head during a live fire exercise on Tuesday. One day earlier, 2 Army corporals were found dead together in an apartment suicide while on furlough. Both were also classified as soldiers who needed extra supervision as they had exhibited suicidal tendencies in personality testing. In their suicide notes, the 2, whose names are being withheld from the media, said they had been abused in their barracks, with one of them writing he even wanted to kill one of his superiors. These are the latest in a series of tragedies involving enlisted soldiers in recent weeks, all after experiencing physical and mental abuse, often at the hands of their seniors. According to the military data, over 820 soldiers have taken their own lives since 2004. 47 of those cases have taken place this year. The Defense Ministry and new Army Chief Kim Yo-han have vowed to address the problem and reform military culture. They've promised a renewed focus on counseling and programs on suicide prevention and anti-bullying. But they'll need to fund their efforts. Of the military's budget of $34 billion this year, just $123,000 went toward educating Korea's 600,000 troops through the types of programs and courses dedicated to preventing tragedies like these from occurring. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Backtracking a little bit, other than the recent suicide cases, a soldier shot and killed his comrades at a general outpost near the inter-Korean border last month, and an Army private was beaten to death in April. And in light of those events, President Park Geun-hye has called up key commanders in the military on Wednesday. She ordered them to do everything within their power to stamp out bullying culture within the service. Defense Minister Han Min-gu has also introduced reform measures meant to bolster the protection of human rights and safety in the military.
So the Bank of Korea will decide on its key interest rate tomorrow, and a rate cut is widely expected.
And if that happens, it will be the first such movement in 15 months and would suggest that BOK policies are falling in line with the Finance Ministry's efforts to stimulate the economy. Our Son Jung-in has more.
Among economists is a widely held belief that the Bank of Korea will cut its benchmark interest rate at Thursday's Monetary Policy Committee. Now the focus is on by how much. Reflecting the expectations, the yield on 3-year government debt has slid over the last couple of months, inching closer to the key interest rate. According to polls, 8 out of 10 financial experts estimate that a cut of 0.25 percentage points would push the benchmark Kospi index up by 60 to 70 points.
If the government and the central bank fail to cooperate on lowering the interest rate, the effects of new policy measures to boost the economy may be in vain in the short term.
Pundits speculate that Central Bank Governor Lee Ju-yeol gave the signal to cut the rate at the policy meeting last month. However, there are concerns that a rate cut may not be as effective as many anticipate and that it won't help to address swelling household debt, which has now surpassed $1 trillion.
A lower interest rate causes an increase in household debt, so a rate cut may help the economy in the short term. But there are potential risk factors that could lead to more household debt in the future.
That puts the Bank of Korea in a tough spot. Another rate freeze will almost certainly trigger criticism over not working in step with market policy, while an interest rate cut without offering clear reasoning may mean lost trust from the public over the abrupt decision. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
And the number of new jobs rebounded in July after shrinking for the previous 4 months, fueling hopes of a pickup in the nation's economic recovery.
Right. Statistics Korea says yearly job growth topped 500,000 in July from less than 400,000 the month before, after peaking at more than 800,000 in February. Now, employment improved in the manufacturing, retail, and construction sectors in particular.
The jobless rate, however, also inched up to 3.4% in July. Young job seekers are still facing tough conditions, with the jobless rate among those aged between 15 and 29 standing at 9%. Well, let's talk a bit more about the Korean economy. For that, we are joined by Professor Shin Se-don from Sookmyung Women's University.
Thank you very much, Professor, for being on the show today. Now, let's start with today's numbers. So employment seems to be picking up. We're also hearing that we are seeing 94% yearly increase in home sales transactions in July. So what can we read into with these figures?
Those two are just a few good signs among so many other bad news. From most data for the third quarter is in the making, so that will be available maybe late September or early October. So it's really difficult to tell what's going on. But one thing pretty sure is, first 2 quarters since the beginning of 2014, domestic demand, export, every major macro indicators are showing rapid decline. So I think it's pretty early to tell whether these good signs are the signs of the economy picking up because of the new team in the government.
Well, the new finance minister seems quite optimistic and gung-ho about making sure we have some efforts, positive efforts, effective efforts to revitalize the economy.
Right.
In your opinion, are they efficient, effective, or is he just trying to have that crescendo as he starts his post?
Well, one of the most important difference between this new team and the old team is old team has been saying that the economy is picking up, right? So in the process of recovery, but all of a sudden, from the Seoul ferry disaster, every figure, economic data showed the other way, and there has been a change, in the economic team, and the new team, unlike the old team, knows the real problem in the economy, and so they had launched a series of packages, and a current announcement in the service industry measures are third in a row within less than a month period. So I think current team is very devastated and very committed to change the economic slowdown into the positive sign.
So we can't take their word for it because they know that talk is cheap if you can't back it up.
Right, and everybody is expecting too much from the current team, but most of the economic policies take more than a year or two for the real outcome to be materialized. So it is really early to tell, whether the new team is actually making the economy going. So we have to see, and we have to wait. Whether this kind of policy will be consistently, mandated through the course of the year.
And you, in your recent column, you did mention that the current economy needs to have more of a fundamental face, maybe on to get a reform in the Korean economy, the structure-wise as well.
Right.
So that, in your opinion, is more, they need to work on that more or sooner than actually just releasing packages and
stimulus
measures.
So far, the current government, current team was emphasizing the investment in the infrastructure, right? And building dams and building highways and building, the integrated resorts. So all of the measures so far has been directed to building building hardware and infrastructure, and the fundamental policy that has to be mandated or incorporated into the policy is the specific measures to heighten or kind of upgrade, the technology of the system and the education of the people, and to heighten the skill of the people. So I think those kind of fundamental policies has to be implemented for the sustained economic growth down the course of the current government.
Well, what about the government's plan that was announced yesterday, creating 180,000 jobs and luring $14.5 billion in investment?
Right.
Is that a feasible plan? I mean,
Well,
they did mention 7 specific sectors.
Right. The service industry is really crucial for the sustainable economic growth. That's for sure. But if you look at the measure so far, as I said, it is mostly dedicated to the building of the resort and the kind of casino, hotels, right? So I think that is really important for sustained growth in the service industry. But that kind of investment in infrastructure is a short-term effect, right? After a few years, you're not going to expect a sustained economic growth. So in order for the service industry to go in a sustainable way, I think we have to do some fundamental, things. In other words, educating the people, enhancement of the people's skill in a very technology-related industry, right? So in that respect, I think we have to implement a lot more. I understand, current team is so desperate to economy get going from less than 3% growth rate to maybe 4%. I think it is imperative for them to implement the kind of investment in the infrastructure. But by the end of this year and probably in the future, the government needs more fundamental approach to really improve the competitiveness of service industry.
Right, Korean public, tough, difficult to impress crowd, and they've been hurt before and disappointed before. So they really have their hands full. Before we let you go, Professor, quickly, the central bank, they plan to lower the rate 25 basis points. Is that enough?
Reportedly, right? Reportedly they may.
In the past, previous governments lowered at least 0.5%. The previous government, No Mu-hyun, and even before Kim Dae-jung government, they have lowered a lot more, right? So I think that a quarter of a percentage point may not be enough, and maybe they would have to reduce another a quarter of a percentage, probably down the road, I think. But 1/4%, right? I think that's not going to be enough for economic recovery, whether that be investment or be consumption. I think 1/4% may not be enough.
All right, so we'll have to wait and see if the central bank will indeed lower, and if lower more than 25 basis points there tomorrow. Thank you very much, Professor, for being here today.
Thank you for being here.
Face a one-day entry ban. 77.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Na Hyung-kyung and Daniel Che.
Arirang News.
Arirang News.
Arirang News.
On Early Edition at 6.
A new study shows 60% of Koreans these days feel as though they are struggling to keep pace with their neighbors. Our Kim Min-ji takes a look at what's making them feel so unstable.
6 out of every 10 Koreans say they feel insecure about their socioeconomic status. In a survey conducted by the Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs on 1,000 people, 60% of respondents said they felt unstable. Half of them said they felt quite unstable, 22% generally unstable, and 8% very unstable. Just 1% of those who responded said they felt very stable about their socioeconomic state. Then what is it making Koreans feel so unsteady? Insufficient income topped the list, followed by job insecurity, a growing distrust in society, a lack of government support, and health issues. As for everyday concerns, the respondents cited reasons ranging from their jobs and what they'll do post-retirement to education, health, and safety. The feelings of socioeconomic insecurity aren't unwarranted. While the income of two-person households in urban areas has risen 16% over the last 5 years, household spending has far outpaced it. As a result of increased spending on housing and education, the number of low and middle-income households in debt has risen, with nearly 70% now having to pay off interest and principal. As of 2012, about 60% of households had an average debt of about $60,000. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, around this time tomorrow, Pope Francis will have already finished the first day of his 5-day visit to Korea.
Right, he will be greeted by President Park Geun-hye at the Seoul Air Base on Thursday, that is. It's his first trip to Asia as a pontiff.
And the first papal visit to Korea in 25 years. Here's our Hwang Ji-hye with a rundown of the Pope's trip.
Pope Francis won't be wasting any time upon his arrival in Korea on Thursday morning. After a short welcoming ceremony, he will head to the presidential office and meet President Park Geun-hye. On Friday, the Pope will head to Daejeon to lead a mass at the city's World Cup Stadium. There, he will console bereaved families and victims of April's Sewol-ho ferry disaster. On Saturday morning, the Pope will visit Seosomun Martyrs Shrine, where the largest number of Catholics were executed in the 19th century. After paying respect at the shrine, he will parade through Gwanghamun Square to beatify 124 Korean martyrs. Beatification is a declaration by the Pope as the head of the church that the deceased faithfully lived a holy life and are now dwelling in heaven. And it's no coincidence that the ceremony is taking place in the heart of Seoul, where the Justice Ministry was located around 200 years ago.
The Pope starts from where the martyrs lived their final moments and goes back to where they were declared sinners to beatify them. He is correcting the past and trying to heal the history of the persecution of Catholics.
On Sunday, he will lead a concluding mass for the 6th Asian Youth Day at Hemi Fortress, located in the nation's southwest region. Around 2,000 young Catholics from 23 different Asian countries and some 4,000 young Korean Catholics will take part. On the morning of his last day in Korea, the Pope will hold a mass for peace and reconciliation at Seoul's Myeongdong Cathedral. Many expect the Pope to convey a message of hope and healing to those who are poor and marginalized, as his visit also includes meeting with the victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery, laid-off workers from Korea's Ssangyong Motor, and a trip to a rehabilitation center called 꽃동네. The Pope will fly back to Rome next Monday afternoon. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Well, you know, when the Pope is in town, a lot of people will be raising their smartphones up high to take photographs, right?
Oh, yeah.
One thing we do a lot with our smartphone these days is watch online comic books or Webtoons.
Webtoons. I'm also an avid reader of Webtoons, and the growth in that industry for the past 10 years really has been outstanding.
Right. Our Park Ji-won tells us about their rise and what the future may hold for the market and its growing fan base.
35-year-old artist Kim Pung publishes a weekly webtoon on a major portal website in Korea. He often accesses his own work through his smartphone and checks the responses of viewers, something that keeps him connected to an industry he's very much invested in.
I see a great potential in the industry. Nowadays, public perception about webtoons has improved greatly, and we see many cases of webtoons being adapted into different genres of art or becoming the source of other products. I see the future of webtoons in a rosy light.
Since debuting in 2003, Kim has witnessed the growth of the webtoon industry in Korea.
Back then, we didn't even have the word webtoon. We called them internet cartoons. It was an infancy period.
The history of web cartoons in Korea dates back about 10 years now. Back in late 1990s and early 2000s, so-called internet cartoons were mainly composed of personal anecdotes or were short comic strips. The webtoon market began growing in 2003 when Daum, a major Korean portal website, started to provide webtoon portal services. Naver, another major portal site, jumped in 2005, triggering a webtoon boom here. Webtoons then began delving into all sorts of genres like action and thrillers and began to involve more serious, large-scale plots. By 2010, Webtoons began a source of story banks for other genres. Nearly 50 Webtoons produced in 2012 and some 40 Webtoons produced last year have been adapted into films, dramas, and even character licensing contracts. As of 2014, Webtoons began providing translated contents to the global market through a diverse set of platforms, such as Naver's global instant messenger program Line, to meet a wider audience outside of Korea. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for staying with us. If you're tuning in from different time zones, do have a wonderful day. This has been Daniel Choi.
And I'm Nai Hyun-kyung. For those of you in Korea, have a great rest of the evening and join us again same time tomorrow.